Welcome back to the Angry Man Podcast with Jason and Greg. So Terence Crawford is back at it again. He was on the last stand with Brian Custer. And of course, Brian is going to ask him about the failed negotiation between himself and Errol Spence Jr. So one thing I got to give Brian Custer props for, because he was asking some of the tougher questions. One of the questions that he asked was, about the $10 million. We hadn't heard Terence Crawford confirm that he was getting $10 million. And it was my thought that he really wasn't getting $10 million. And I still don't believe he's getting the $10 million. But he did confirm that he is getting $10 million. When Brian Custer asked him, about the solvency of the company, which I thought was a great question. Why would you go with a smaller entity? Because you don't know about the solvency. He said that he'd already been paid half the money. He didn't say $5 million, but he said half the money. And that the other half of the money is going to be paid before he even steps in the ring. And the thing about it, with the line of questions that Brian Custer had with Terence Crawford and asking, whether or not he cared about it, Terence Crawford really doesn't care about whether or not the company is solvent or not, as long as he can get the money, right? So solvency, who cares? Whether you're going bankrupt or not, whether I earn this money or not, whether I generate it or not, I want the money up front. And that's just what it is. That's what Terence Crawford is right now. Terence Crawford, he's not a businessman, but at the same time, he's a businessman. And by that, I mean, he's in it to get as much money of it out as he can. He's more like I would call him a private equity company. He's like a private equity. They'll come in, they'll restructure, they'll bleed out resources out of company. They'll take a company and strip the company down of all of his assets and then sell off the company. That's Terence Crawford. He doesn't really care about the entity in itself and the survival of the entity. He's more so about what can I get out of the entity. And that's just who he is. So the other thing that I wanted to mention was the fact that, again, Brian Custer was asking some really good questions that I think a lot of us have been asking in the general public and people who are on on YouTube. And he basically asked him about the contract and why he didn't put out the contract. And I thought his response was interesting there, because he's saying that the reason why he didn't put out the contract was because, you just can't put out a contract like that. You could get sued for just putting out contracts. And people don't understand business, and that's why, we're just going out here and just saying all these things. Here's what I'm not understanding about what Terence Crawford is saying related to the contract. How can you get sued when the contract is between you and the guy that's telling you to put the contract out? That's what I'm confused about. How is it possible that you can get sued by Errol Spence, because the contract is between you two? So how is it that Errol Spence can sue you? You definitely can't sue yourself. How is it that Errol Spence can sue you for asking you to put out a contract? It doesn't make any sense. That was just idiotic to me. And then he pushed it back to Errol Spence, saying that, okay, so why doesn't he put the contract out, using that as an excuse? Listen, I think Errol can put the contract out, but if he does, then what does it prove? Because then the next comment would be, well, how do we know that that's actually the contract that Terence Crawford received? And it was Terence Crawford that was saying, that was making the assertion that things were not correct in the contract. So he said, put out the contract. Let's see what was actually in the contract. Because the whole notion was, the whole thing that they were talking about was visibility and transparency. And that's when Errol Spence told him, put out the contract. Let's see the iteration that you have, since you're saying that that's not. Whatever Errol Spence puts out, the excuse is going to be made, well, you guys are the ones that generated the contract, so how do we know that that's what, Terence Crawford actually received? That's why he's saying Terence Crawford needs to put out the contract. That whole excuse about being sued and all that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. I don't understand that. The contract is between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. If Terence Crawford puts it out with the permission of Errol Spence is on Twitter that everybody can see, the whole world can see, verbally telling him to put the contract out, then how can Errol Spence sue him? And he's the only other party in the contract. It doesn't make sense. And then even if you back up, let's say that there's other entities within the contract. Let's say it's Showtime, or it's whoever, it's the PBC or some. All you need is the excerpt. The excerpt associated with a certain portion of the contract. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think he would actually get sued for this. It's considering that the contract is really between those two. They're the main parties in that contract. And so any part of that contract that's associated specifically with Terence Crawford, which would have been the visibility associated with the fight, I just feel like he couldn't have been sued for that. I don't believe that to be the case. But anyway, what do you guys think about what Terence Crawford is saying? He's saying he's getting $10 million. Do you think he's really getting that $10 million? Do you think Terence Crawford is all about the money, or is he really trying to make the fight with Errol Spence? You know, he mentioned that, you know, after the fight, that's still going to be the goal, to come back to Errol Spence and make that fight. I struggle to believe that. I don't think it's going to happen. You guys tell me what you think in the comment section. Don't forget to hate, like, comment, and subscribe. This is the Angry Man Podcast, AM Sports Media, and I'm out.